Hello. Last time we started a series on education and we mentioned different concepts like a classical education, a liberal education. I intimated that we were going to be talking about the seven liberal arts of antiquity and the Middle Ages that form the basis of a liberal education. Now, the way I want to approach it today, I suppose, is to begin with something that the great poet of the British Empire, Rudyard Kipling, once said. It's a couple of lines of verse, but it will give us an entree into considering the subject of education. He said, "I keep 6 honest serving men. Their names are what and why and when and how and where and who. I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. Their names are what and why and when and how and where and who." There are the 6. A good place to start, because these are the tools of inquiry. The tools are all question words. And by asking these questions, what is education, why is education, how is education, and so on, we can approach it from a number of different angles and get a picture. And it's a big topic, so we don't need to rush through it. So we'll just do as much as we can. And if we make it to the liberal arts, we do. Otherwise, that can be in a subsequent video. The first question word he used was what. So, what is education? Last time we talked about the etymology, educare, to lead forth. So it is evoking some knowledge that is in the student. Education is also just simply about the acquisition of knowledge. And knowledge is essentially philosophical. The education that we're talking about on this channel is essentially philosophical. And we can see this in our education system reflected. When kids are young and do primary education, they have to learn about everything. And typically they will have one teacher in kindergarten, year 2, year 3, and so on through their primary years. And when a teacher does a degree, attains a qualification in primary education, they should be able to teach everything on the curriculum. That word is important. Curriculum is about the what of education. It's the content of education. Another important word that we'll get to is pedagogy. Pedagogy describes the how of education, how we learn and how we educate. So the curriculum is founded on the 3 R's, as they used to say: reading, writing, and arithmetic, if we can bodgy up the spelling a bit. This goes to the heart of education in literacy and numeracy. Literacy and numeracy seem to be the fundamental basis of modern education, but also of traditional education, because we will see that whereas we study English and mathematics these days, and we begin very young, in our country we have national standards that young people, primary school students need to, and early secondary school students need to attain in literacy and numeracy. It's called the NAP plan. So we expect a certain standard that is achieved in schools throughout the nation. Traditionally, in the 7 liberal arts, there was a group of 3 subjects called the trivium and a group of 4 subjects called the quadrivium, together making the 7. And the trivium was their equivalent of our literacy. It doesn't mean that it was taught in the way that we teach literacy, but it had to do with literacy, and it consisted of grammar, logic and rhetoric. How to use the language, how to think in categories, how to understand the language, how to speak persuasively. And then the quadrivium stood in, or was the precursor of our numeracy, because it was based on number. It taught arithmetic, geometry, music or harmony, and astronomy. It all went back to number though, in the quadrivium, because arithmetic is number pure and simple. Geometry was number applied to space. That's how it was conceived. And harmony or music, I'm talking about the musicological side rather than the actual playing of instruments, was about the application of number to time, or through time, in time. And astronomy was about applying number in time and in space, and contemplating the cycles of the heavenly bodies, for example. Now, the end of studying this literary clutch of subjects and this numeracy clutch of subjects was to prepare somebody for the deep dive into philosophical contemplation. Because all education, or the end of education, was conceived in this traditional system as philosophical. It prepared us to understand, contemplate the mysteries of our existence, our place in the universe, the nature of man, and how we make moral choices, and so on. Why do we have education? Oh, but before we go to the why, which is Kipling's second question word, still on the what, I want to make the point that philosophy is the root of 2 conceptual domains, the verbal and the mathematical. Both words and numbers, letters and numbers, because letters are the building blocks of words, have a common source in philosophy. That's why we begin with learning the ABC and the 1, 2, 3, and we end in philosophy. a way to think about it is this, that numbers have to do with the study of quantities, and concepts, linguistic concepts, words, have to do with qualities. So you have the qualitative side of conception and the quantitative side of conception. We human beings are conceptual beings. We employ concepts in order to make sense of reality and in order to communicate with one another. And if you want to think of concepts are really based on identifying qualities. Some epistemologists would say that when we take a concept like table, let's just say table, it's a name for a category of things, then part of what we're doing, if not the essence of what we're doing, is abstracting the quality of tableness from all the possible measurements of particular tables that exist. In other words, we want to omit mention of what materials are involved in the building of the table. We want to omit questions of design and shapes of the table. Of course, you can't have a table of there's a broad possibility of shapes, but a table essentially needs to have a top and legs. We want to omit the actual specific measurements of any tables, the width, the length, the height of the table. We want to omit measurements on the colour spectrum and so on. So what we're left with is the distilled quality of tableness, and it becomes the basis of a concept. And that's the foundation of our literacy. That concept then gets represented by an audio-visual symbol, a word. And it's an audio-visual symbol because it can be spoken and heard, audio. It can be written down and read. And what is written down, print on a page, is not the concept. It's a symbol of the concept. It refers to this abstraction that we hold, which seems to be a distillation of quality. And the word table is a sound wave, essentially. It's an utterance. And your ear picks it up. It's just a vibration. It is not the table or the concept of table, but it symbolizes the concept of table. So right there we have the concept introduced as an audio-visual symbol, or sorry, the word, if you like, the word introduced as an audio-visual symbol for the concept, which is abstract. On the numeracy side, of course, we begin with quantities. We have our numbers. The numbers that we use today come from Arabic numerals, which also come from Hindu numerals, Indian numerals, and they are very significant. We can make time in the future to talk about the symbolism of numbers. What does a zero mean? What does the one mean? Unity and duality, two-ness and three-ness. So ultimately, we divide education into, or the foundations of education into literacy and numeracy. And at the end of the day, we have to synthesize all of this in our maturity to try to get back to that cognate philosophical source of conception in both the verbal and the mathematical domain. And one way to do that is to train ourselves. We can train ourselves to see quantity in quality, precision in conception. And we can also train ourselves to see quality in quantity. You see the numbers, the quantities, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. They are not just counting tools. There's a quality associated with each one. And some philosophical systems go a long way in exploring the qualitative aspect of numbers. There's a long history to it. Whether we look at an ancient sage like Pythagoras, who believed that the whole universe was structured on numbers, that numbers was the secret to the universe, or we come forward to the 20th century and see a modern philosopher like Bertrand Russell, in his works on mathematical philosophy, recognizing the importance of numbers in the construction of our universe. Again, another example might be the Kabbalah, which is associated with esoteric Judaism and its metaphysics. One Kabbalistic work is called the Sefer Yetzirah, and it seems to date to around 200 years into the Common Era. And in that work, it explains how the Creator builds the whole universe with letters and numbers. The 10 emanations, and this is taken up in Neoplatonic philosophy as well, emanations. And the letters of the Hebrew alphabet in that system are like creative powers that the Creator uses to call things into existence. They are not merely sounds, not merely phonetic tools that go to make up words, but each letter has an ontology associated with it. It helps to actually build the universe. So you've got the 10 emanations, which are like the digits on the two hands of the Creator fashioning the world. And you've got the letters of the alphabet, 22 in the case of the Hebrew language, which fashion all the created things. And then in Neoplatonism, they take the idea of emanations and develop that. And that came out of Alexandria and places like that, North Africa in the ancient world. And an emanation is a sort of stage of relationship between the Creator and the creation. We spoke about how the Creator is intimately associated with the creation. And each number has been given by this school of philosophers. They use numbers to describe how engaged or disengaged the creator is from the creation. So they're like stages of creation. Anyway, there are two examples of how numbers have been imbued with qualities. And philosophers have done this on the way back to finding that common source of both verbal concepts and mathematical concepts. Now, why do we have education? Well, I would simply submit that the purpose of education is to make better citizens, to become as good a citizen as you can. And it's important today because there are so many issues in our society and in the world that we need to engage, and we need to find our voice on them as well. If you think about it, if you don't have the tools to engage with what's going on, if you can't comment, if you can't analyse, if you can't express your opinion, you can not just be left behind, but you will not be involved in the action of giving voice to the marginalised and of seeking justice.
That's what they want.
Well, this is the thing. Let's say you have some unscrupulous leaders. You need to be able to stand up and argue, make a case against what we're being told or what we're being asked to do. You remember the pandemic. Each citizen had a decision to make, whether to go along with the agenda or whether to question it.
They had a decision to make, or were they forced into a decision?
Well, that's the thing. If you don't have the tools, if you're not an informed citizenry, you haven't been taught critical thinking.
No.
It's very hard to buck a trend or to question a trend or to even exercise your critical faculties because you don't know how to defend your position.
That's right.
Then we've got so many things going on in the world, wars, and we're told that we should be involved in such and such a war. Well, people are going to get killed. There's going to be economic derangements. Injustices are going to be committed. The earth, the environment is going to be trashed.
That's right.
An informed citizenry can't have the wool pulled over its eyes in the same way that a dumbed down citizenry can. This is what I mean by being a good citizen. I'm focusing here on the philosophical education that leads to civic responsibility, being a good citizen, being a good global citizen. Most of the issues that are of interest today are global issues. Now, is this the only why approach we can take? Is it the only answer to why we seek education? We need education. We have such a thing as education. No, it's not the only approach. For example, just look around you. A lot of people tell their kids with reason, go to school, get good grades, then you can get into university, and then you can get a degree or a qualification in order to land a good job.
And be in debt.
Well, that can lead to debt. You know, it's interesting you say that, Belinda, because more and more people are questioning that pathway today.
It is. There's a whole lot of questioning going out there now about our education system.
There is. You only have to dip into social media and you see a lot of people have lost their faith, not only in governmental authorities, but in the education system. And it's
That's
like,
right.
is it worth getting into such deep debt to get a qualification that you may not be able to put into use in the world?
That's right.
But if we just focus on the rationale behind it, maybe it worked a bit better in the past. Maybe it's a bit more complicated today as our society becomes more complicated, more complex, more diversified, and they're more specialised roles. But one of the...
And our need for knowledge has become more as well than I think the past. People were more accepting of stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, than they are now.
That pathway, get the education to get a job, is it tells us that one of the purposes of education is vocational. It's equipping somebody to take a role in the workforce. Education is preparation for employment. In other words, if education is preparation for employment, then knowledge, the content of education, becomes the sets of learnings that industry requires, all the different industries require, so that a certain level of competence is practiced in those industries. Now, there's another, apart from that vocational approach to education, there is also a religious approach to education. If you go around the world, you will see madrasas in the Islamic world, you'll see seminaries in the Christian world, and theological colleges, you'll see yeshivas in the Jewish world, and other institutions in the East where people acquire a religious education, because in a sense education is also the learnings of a particular community, the oral and written traditions of a community that journeys together. They might think of themselves as the people of God, and they have traditions set down in holy books and commentaries on those holy books. And therefore, in order to keep their faith community together and journey towards the destination, which is imagined to be a beautiful place of union with God, heaven, let's just say returning to the Creator, then you need a tight-knit community that doesn't lose its traditions and keeps them alive, which means that people have to learn these traditions. Originally, they may have just been oral traditions, but over time they get written down, and then they get commented upon, and then they get developed into laws for living. Apparently, there are 613 mitzvot, or laws, in the Torah. And the Catholic Church has an enormous volume of canon law. And there's a long history of Islamic jurisprudence. Because ultimately, religious knowledge will translate into knowledge for running a society, for regulating a society, for putting morality into action. So you could say that there are three basic purposes of education. One, they are the learnings of a faith community. Two, they are the instruction manual for jobs in the economy. And so getting education means getting equipped to fulfill an occupation. Right?
Well,
But
some people are saying on the internet it's a preparation for slavery.
yes, some people do say that.
I know. I
Well,
think that's a bit harsh.
part of the slavery is debt slavery. And I suppose part of the slavery is working according to somebody else's agenda.
That's right.
And so often the pressure of working for a corporation or a big organisation today is that they sort of own your life.
We've all been there. We've all done that. Yeah.
And you have to become part of their family kind of thing.
That's right.
And it's very difficult to get that work-life balance. So
It sure is.
there can be enslavement in different ways. Do you have a sense of ownership over your education and work? But it doesn't change this basic analysis. So it could be economic or religious, or it could be political, which is the one that I'm focusing on, the why that I'm focusing on here when I say that the purpose of education is to make good citizens, to make an informed citizenry. So, the what, the why, and the when. The when of education is also important because we can't learn everything at once. I mentioned that at that primary level, we get a general education, and then as we progress through secondary and tertiary levels, we get more specialised education. And so the teachers that you get in high school, you'll get one teacher for mathematics and a different teacher for history and a different teacher for geography. It's becoming more specialised. And then when you go to university, it becomes, or college, it becomes more specialised again. And part of that, you could say, is to fulfill a specialised role in the economy. The other thing about when is that there are stages of psychological development. And theorists like Piaget describe different stages in a child's cognitive development. There are times when it's a real art to know just how to teach the young and then to adapt the teaching as the young get older. Is it possible for a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old to understand the reasons for things in a way that a post-pubescent teen can, let's say? If you're teaching morality, for example, when a child is young, maybe they just need to know what is right and what is wrong. And it's right and wrong because daddy or mummy said so. And there can be consequences if you do the wrong thing. But as they get older, they'll start to get curious about why is something right and why is something wrong. And then you have to be ready to furnish an explanation to feed their growing minds so that ultimately they become autonomous moral individuals and they act on principle. They know why the good is the good and the wrong is the wrong to avoid. It's, again, unrealistic to expect a youngster to be able to write a critique of Rousseau or Shakespeare or something because they have to learn the basics. They have to begin by learning the ABC. There are some pedagogues, like, I believe, who was it that talked about the different stages of learning. For the first stage being just rote memorization of something. Like if you're studying history, That's right. A fellow by the name of Bloom, and he talked about the taxonomy of knowledge, the classification of knowledge. So when you're starting something, you just start with brute memorization and recall. If you're starting with history, if you're studying history, let's say, you might start with dates and names. And once you've sort of got that in your possession, it gives you a bit of power and confidence to go on. And the next step would be to understand what happened at those times. And only after you do that can you then start getting into the analysis of what happened at those junctures in history. And then you get into critical evaluation, perhaps, of what the historiography says, what different historians have written about these periods in history. And then finally, the ultimate stage in Bloom's taxonomy of knowledge is to be creative, to actually comprehend what's being done in the field and then take it up a notch. Be able to add something that's new, but that isn't just simply rogue and novel, but comprehends the tradition, the work of others, and is then able to provide new knowledge, maybe in a niche area. So this is why the when of education is there are many ways to understand the when of education, when something should be learned. I mean, we all start, who are our first educators? Our parents. It starts in the home. And there are things that we need to learn early, and there are things that we can learn later. And often those things that we learn later are quite specialised, and they have to do with the contribution that we need to make to society. So that's the what, the why, the when. We'll have to come back in the next video and look at the other three questions.